I'm not asking for your sympathy, Mona said, her voice calm but unwavering. I just want to help you walk again. The words hung in the air, challenging the very foundation of what Damian Holden believed was possible. Absurd. Impossible. His eyes narrowed, and a bitter laugh escaped him. Sitting in his wheelchair, the once unstoppable billionaire CEO of Holden Industries, surrounded by his wealth and luxury, couldn't fathom the words coming from a janitor, a woman who cleaned his floors and served his office, a woman who had never known the life he lived. Damian raised an eyebrow, his polished gaze sweeping over Mona, whose presence seemed small in comparison to his towering empire. But what she said, what she dared to suggest, help him walk again, struck a chord he wasn't ready to admit. I said, I'll help you walk again, Mona repeated, standing just beyond the velvet ropes that separated the world of luxury from the world of service. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. Damian's eyes searched hers, and there was no hint of mockery in them. No judgment, just quiet, firm certainty. Damian felt a rush of anger. He scoffed. Do you offer spinal surgeries with your mop and bucket? He asked, a sharp edge in his voice. The laughter that followed was cold, dismissive, the kind only a man who had known nothing but power could afford to give. Mona didn't flinch. No, Mr. Holden. I offer something your doctors haven't. Damian stared at her, disbelief mixed with a flicker of intrigue. He had seen many people come and go, those who bowed at his feet, those who tried to offer solutions, but none had ever dared to challenge him in this way. Something about her tone, steadfast, unapologetic, made him stop. You don't believe me, she continued, her words as quiet as they were firm. But I've seen it before. I can help you. Damian was a man who had been used to controlling everything around him, his wealth, his businesses, his future. And yet here, in the most unlikely of places, in front of a woman who had never been part of his world, he felt something shift. The floor beneath him no longer felt solid. The empire he had built no longer seemed unshakable. What happened next would force him to reconsider everything about strength, vulnerability, and the true cost of healing. Make sure to leave a comment telling us where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling narratives like this one. Now, sit back and enjoy. Damian Holden had once lived in a world where success was measured by how far he could push himself and everyone around him. As the CEO of Holden Industries, he had built his empire from the ground up, overcoming countless obstacles and outsmarting anyone who stood in his way. His name was synonymous with wealth, power, and invincibility. But all that changed in a heartbeat. For Damian Holden, the accident wasn't just a tragedy. It was a devastating loss of control. The very thing that had defined his life, his success, his identity, had been stolen from him in an instant. Now, as he sat in the wheelchair that confined him to a life of silence and solitude, the world around him felt small. No amount of money, no luxurious penthouse or lavish dinner parties could fill the void left behind by his inability to walk. His world, once filled with meetings, deals, and handshakes, now felt like a prison. Damian had long believed that strength was a product of power, wealth, influence. He had lived that philosophy for years, scaling heights few could ever dream of. He had built an empire, brick by brick, with his own hands, using ambition as his only fuel. But now, surrounded by the trappings of his success, he realized he had never been weaker. Mona Jacobs, on the other hand, had never been given the luxury of pretending. Her strength came from surviving the rawest of realities. Born into a tough neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, Mona knew that strength was never about how much you had. It was about how much you could endure without breaking. She had seen it firsthand in her mother, a woman who, at the height of her life's potential, was suddenly struck down by an undiagnosed condition that left her paralyzed from the waist down. Mona was only 13 at the time. The doctor's diagnoses were vague, the treatments ineffective. What followed was a blur of hospital visits, medical bills, and endless hours of waiting. But Mona's mother, a woman who had once been a source of energy and laughter, seemed to wither away with every passing day. It wasn't until one night, when Mona found her mother sitting alone in her wheelchair, staring out the window at a world she could no longer engage with, that the true transformation began. "You're not a broken woman," Mona had told her mother quietly, sitting down beside her. "You just haven't figured out how to move forward yet." Her mother had turned to her then, her eyes tired but still filled with a flicker of the woman she used to be. "What do you mean, darling?" Mona smiled softly, her heart aching for the woman who had once been so full of life. "The body may be paralyzed, but the mind is still free. If you can find a way to heal here," she tapped her forehead gently, "then you can heal anywhere." Mona's belief in the power of the mind over the body grew stronger as she watched her mother heal, not through surgery or medical miracles, but through time, patience, and emotional resilience. It was the kind of strength that could not be measured in dollars or degrees, the kind that came from within, from digging deep into the well of one's soul and finding a reason to keep going when everything seemed lost. Her mother eventually regained enough strength to walk again, though never as fully as she had before. But it was enough. Enough to live with dignity, to smile without the weight of shame, and most importantly, enough to feel alive again. That experience shaped Mona's entire perspective on life. She understood, in ways others could not, that true healing was not a matter of wealth or status, but of mental and emotional endurance. It was about learning to embrace what you could not control, and finding peace in that acceptance. Mona became a firm believer that the mind held the key to recovery, a key that could unlock doors no one even knew were there. And so, when Damian Holden, a man who had everything but seemed to have nothing at all, sat before her with his pride and arrogance, Mona made a decision. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or status. She wasn't looking for recognition or fame. What mattered to her was the chance to help him see something he had never understood. That healing began with the mind, not the body. She approached him, as she had done countless times with others in her life. This time, however, she knew it wouldn't be easy. "I'll help you walk again," she said, her words measured and calm. Damian looked at her for a long moment, incredulous. And then the laugh came, sharp, bitter. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. "You'll help me walk again?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You, a janitor? And how exactly do you plan on doing that? Magic?" Mona's face remained expressionless, her calm eyes meeting his mocking gaze. "I'm not asking for your sympathy, Mr. Holden. I'm asking to help you heal." He scoffed, his disbelief clear in his posture. The billionaire CEO, a man accustomed to having every part of his life under control, was now being offered an impossible solution from a woman whose life he couldn't possibly understand. "You're out of your depth," he said flatly. "You're wasting your time. You think you can do what doctors haven't? You think you can fix me?" His words were harsh, dismissive, but Mona didn't flinch. She didn't back down. I don't believe in miracles, Mr. Holden. I believe in the power of the mind, and I believe that if you let go of your pride long enough, you'll see that you don't need to be fixed. You just need to let yourself heal. Damian glared at her, still not ready to accept the reality she was offering him. I've heard it all before, he muttered, waving her off. What could a janitor possibly know about healing? Mona stayed quiet for a beat, her gaze unwavering. I know that sometimes the hardest thing isn't to move forward. It's to face what's been holding you back. Damian Holden's world had been built on power, but Mona knew something far more valuable. Strength, real strength, came not from external achievements, but from an internal resolve that allowed you to face what was broken, what needed mending, and what you couldn't change. Her offer hung in the air between them, a challenge, a promise. Whether he chose to accept it or not, she knew one thing for sure. Damian Holden was about to find out what true strength really meant. Damian Holden had always been in control. That was the cornerstone of his life. Every deal he made, every risk he took, every triumph in his career was proof that he could bend the world to his will. But after the accident, he was no longer the man who dominated boardrooms and made powerful decisions. He was a man stuck in a wheelchair, his body a prison he couldn't escape. And that, he thought bitterly, was his punishment. A permanent sentence. When Mona had first spoken those words, "I'll help you walk again," Damian had dismissed them outright. How could a janitor, someone whose existence was to be invisible, ever understand his world, let alone help him escape it? Her offer had felt absurd. It still did. In the weeks that followed, Mona's persistence became a quiet thorn in his side. She wasn't like the other people who pandered to him, who tried to tiptoe around his pain. She wasn't looking for sympathy or approval. Instead, she came in every day with a calm resolve, her presence in his space, both subtle and undeniable. She would sweep, mop, and tend to the office with the same diligence, always silent, always unwavering. But each time she passed him, her words, "I'll help you walk again," would echo in his mind, stirring a mix of frustration and curiosity. Damian would glare at her, his eyes sharp and dismissive. How dare she make him confront something he wasn't ready to? And yet, no matter how hard he tried to ignore her, her quiet persistence began to gnaw at him. His pride refused to admit it, but her presence, her calmness, chipped away at the walls he had built around himself. There was something in her eyes, something steadfast, that made him feel both angry and vulnerable. She was offering him something he couldn't ignore, though he wanted to. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened, an ordinary cleaning session that turned into something unexpected. Damian had spent the last few hours alone in his penthouse, staring at the view of the city below. The skyscrapers, the endless lines of traffic, the hustle of life all around him. It all seemed so distant, like it was happening in another world, far away from the solitude that consumed him. His thoughts were becoming more erratic, more desperate. He was tired of being alone in this body, of being trapped in a life that no longer felt like his own. He wanted out. When Mona entered the room that afternoon, pushing her mop bucket across the marble floors, she was quiet, as always. She hadn't yet said a word to him that day, and he wasn't in the mood to acknowledge her either. But then, for some reason, he snapped. "You know," he began, his voice low but sharp, "I don't know what you think you're doing here. You can't fix me. None of you can. You don't know what it's like to have your entire life taken away in an instant." Mona paused for a moment, her mop still in hand. She didn't flinch. She didn't seem surprised. Instead, she looked at him, not with pity or sympathy, but with a quiet understanding that made Damian feel even more exposed. "I didn't say I could fix you. Mona replied softly. I said I could help you, but you have to let me. Damian scoffed. Help me? Help me do what? You think you can help me walk again? That's what you're offering, right? What exactly do you think you can do for me that the best doctors couldn't? He wasn't angry at her, not exactly, but he was frustrated. He was tired of pretending to be fine, tired of trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he didn't need help. But it was easier to lash out at Mona than to face the truth. He had no idea how to escape this prison. Mona didn't respond immediately. Instead, she set down her mop, walked over to the chair near the window and sat down, her hands folded in her lap. She waited for him to settle into the silence before she spoke. You're angry, she said, her voice steady. And that's okay. But you're also running away from something. Damian stared at her, his eyes hard. What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about your mind, Mona continued. Your body is broken, yes. But your mind is still fighting you. You don't need to heal physically first. You need to heal emotionally. You've spent months locked away in this anger, and that's what's holding you back. You're angry at the world for taking your legs away, but the real reason you're angry is because you can't control it. Damian didn't know how to respond. He was too stunned by her words, too thrown off balance. Mona's quiet conviction had pierced through the layers of rage and shame he had carefully constructed around himself. The idea that his anger, his isolation, was the real barrier to his recovery was unsettling. But it was true. He had been angry, furious even, and he had let that fury isolate him from everyone, even from the possibility of healing. He looked away, unwilling to admit the truth to her or to himself. You don't understand, he muttered. Maybe not, Mona said, her voice soft but firm. But I've seen people heal. I've seen people find the strength to move forward when everything else tells them they can't. And it starts here. She tapped her forehead gently. Healing doesn't come from a pill or a treatment plan. It comes from inside of you. Damian clenched his fists, staring down at them. He hated how right she sounded, how much it stung to hear those words. He had spent so long fighting the truth that the thought of letting go was terrifying. But something in her words stayed with him. Something he hadn't expected to find in her. A woman who mopped floors, who lived a life so far removed from his own, had made him feel seen. Mona leaned forward, offering him a way out, a chance he wasn't sure he was ready to take. I know you're angry, Damian, but if you let me help you, if you allow yourself to trust me, we can begin the process of healing. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. But in the silence that stretched between them, he felt a shift, a crack in the wall of his resistance. And for the first time in months, he considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Mona could help him walk again. But only if he allowed himself to try. Damian Holden had always been the one to call the shots, to dictate terms and control every outcome. But as he wheeled himself into the small office where Mona had arranged their first therapy session, he couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of discomfort. The very idea that a janitor, someone whose life he had never even noticed, could help him, someone who had once commanded boardrooms and entire industries, felt like an insult. But here he was, reluctantly giving it a chance. He hated himself for needing this, and he hated that, deep down, he knew it was the only thing left to try. Mona was already there, sitting calmly in the chair across from him, her demeanor as serene as it had always been. She didn't look nervous. You didn't seem intimidated by his presence. To Damian, that was both infuriating and strangely reassuring. She gestured to the chair beside her. Please, sit. He rolled his eyes but complied, wheeling himself forward and positioning his wheelchair at the small table between them. His arms crossed defensively, his face a mask of annoyance. "Let's get this over with," he muttered under his breath, his tone laced with reluctance. Mona didn't respond to his bitterness, and that only frustrated him further. Instead, she simply looked at him, her gaze steady and non-judgmental. "You're here now," she said quietly. "That's all I'm asking for." Damian clenched his jaw, still not ready to surrender to her methods. "Fine," he snapped, as if saying it out loud made it somehow less real. "Let's start." Mona's approach was unlike anything Damian had expected. She didn't push him physically, didn't tell him to perform exercises or attempt anything that might immediately challenge his frail body. Instead, she asked him to close his eyes and take a few deep breaths. The simplicity of the request irked him. "I thought we were here to fix my legs, not meditate," he remarked with a scoff, trying to mask the underlying discomfort he felt. She smiled slightly, an almost imperceptible movement that softened her face. "The legs will come later. First, we need to address what's holding them back." Damian was about to argue, but Mona's calm presence stopped him. There was no rush, no urgency in her. She simply waited for him to follow her lead. After a few moments, he reluctantly closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his anger settle into his chest. "Think back to the man you were before the accident." Mona's voice was soft, guiding. "Before all this, what did you believe was possible for yourself?" Damian gritted his teeth. He didn't want to remember the man he had been, the confident, ambitious CEO who had always been one step ahead of everyone.
The man who could bend the world to his will. He didn't want to feel that loss, didn't want to acknowledge that the man he used to be had been buried beneath the rubble of this new reality. But Mona didn't rush him. She let the silence stretch out, her patience unwavering. Slowly, despite himself, Damian's thoughts began to drift. He remembered the way he used to command rooms with a single glance, the thrill of a big deal going through, the satisfaction of success. He had been untouchable. He had felt invincible. But now he felt like a ghost, a hollow version of the man he once was. "You were someone who believed anything was possible," Mona's voice broke through his thoughts. "But somewhere along the way you stopped believing in yourself." Damian winced at the truth in her words. He opened his eyes, but Mona didn't look at him in judgment. She simply observed, waiting for him to process. "Do you think that's why you're stuck?" she asked. "Because you've forgotten what it means to believe in yourself?" Damian's chest tightened, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He hated this. He hated that she was right. The anger that had kept him going for so long was now his prison, but it was all he had left. He clenched his fists on the armrests, resisting the urge to lash out. "You don't get it," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "I've tried everything. Doctors, therapies. Nothing works. I'm never going to walk again. This is my life now, and it's not about belief. It's about accepting reality." Mona was silent for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. Then she spoke again, softly but firmly. "Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means letting go of what you can't control and finding peace with what you have." Damian stared at her, the words sinking in deeper than he cared to admit. He didn't want peace. He wanted control. But that was the thing. He couldn't control this. He was broken. His body, his life, everything he had worked for, all of it felt like it had been ripped away in the blink of an eye. How could he find peace in that? But Mona wasn't done. What if the real healing isn't in fixing your body first,
What if it's about healing your mind? What if your body can't move because your mind is still stuck in a place of anger and grief? Damian's heart raced, his thoughts scrambling to find something to hold on to. She was asking him to do something he wasn't ready to do, something terrifying. To feel again. To confront the pain that had been festering inside him for months. And then, something unexpected happened. In that quiet, still room, with Mona's steady voice guiding him, the dam inside him cracked. For the first time since the accident, he allowed himself to feel. The anger, the frustration, the grief, it all came rushing in like a flood. He felt the tears sting his eyes, but he didn't stop them. "I miss who I was," he said, his voice cracking. "I miss the man who could stand, who could do anything. Now I'm nothing. I feel useless. And I don't know how to fix it." Mona didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply sat there, letting him speak, offering him a space to unload all the pain he had been carrying. When the words stopped coming, Damian felt a strange sense of release. He had never let anyone see him like this, vulnerable, raw, unguarded. And yet, in that moment, he felt something shift inside him. A small crack of light in the darkness. Mona smiled gently. "That's the first step, Damian. Letting yourself feel is the first step toward healing." For the first time in months, Damian didn't feel completely broken. There was something stirring within him, a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to walk again. Not with his legs, but with his heart. Damian wasn't ready to say it aloud yet, but in that moment, he knew that Mona's offer, strange as it was, had unlocked something within him. And for the first time since the accident,
He felt like he had a choice in the matter.
the days turned into weeks, and with each passing session, Damian Holden felt his frustration grow. The first few sessions with Mona had given him hope, a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. But now, as he wheeled himself into the small room for another round of therapy, that spark was beginning to feel like a distant memory. He had expected quick results. After all, Mona had promised to help him walk again. But the progress was slow. Too slow for someone like Damian, who had spent his entire life used to being at the top, used to seeing immediate results from his actions. His body, still stiff and unresponsive, felt like a constant reminder that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free from his physical limitations. And worse, his mind seemed to be following suit. Each time Mona guided him through another mental exercise, another moment of emotional reflection, he felt the same frustration bubble up inside him. He hated feeling vulnerable. He hated admitting that he was still broken, emotionally and physically. He wanted to be the man who could control everything, who could move forward without needing anyone's help. But every time Mona asked him to dig deeper, to confront his anger and grief, he found himself resenting her methods. "I don't know if this is working," he muttered one afternoon, his eyes narrowing as Mona guided him through yet another breathing exercise. "I'm still in this chair, still stuck. I don't see how talking about my feelings is going to change that." Mona looked at him with patience in her eyes. Her calm demeanor, as always, was a stark contrast to his frustration. Healing isn't just about what you can see. It's about what you can't. Emotional healing comes first. Only when you begin to face the parts of yourself you've been running from can you start to move forward. Damian scoffed, his grip tightening on the arms of his chair. "I've been doing this for weeks, Mona.
I've tried your way. I still don't feel any different."
Mona's expression remained unchanged, but her voice grew firmer, a subtle reminder of the strength she had shown him before. "Healing is never linear, Damian. It's not a straight path. Some days will feel like setbacks, others will feel like breakthroughs. But they're all part of the process. And you can't heal without confronting the things you've been avoiding. He hated hearing that. He hated feeling like he was being told to keep pushing through a pain that seemed endless. Damian had built his empire on being a man who didn't show weakness, who didn't stop until he reached the top. But here, in this small room, with Mona's soft words nudging him to look inward, he felt like a failure. Mona's wisdom, as frustrating as it was, stuck with him in moments when he least expected it. She had been patient, almost too patient, in ways that felt like slow torture. But beneath the layers of resentment, a small part of him began to understand what she meant. Healing wasn't just about the body. It was about the mind. And that was the part he had neglected for so long. One afternoon, after yet another uneventful session, Damian felt the frustration reach its boiling point. He slammed his fist against the armrest of his wheelchair, the sound sharp and unforgiving. "I can't do this anymore," he snapped, his voice filled with anger. "This is pointless. I'm never going to walk again. I don't care what you say, Mona. I've accepted it. I've tried everything, and nothing works. Why can't you just let me be?" Mona didn't flinch, didn't move. She simply stood there, her hands folded calmly in front of her, waiting for him to exhaust himself. When the silence stretched between them, Damian's chest heaved with shallow breaths. He felt the weight of his own words sink in, but he couldn't stop them. He had reached a breaking point. Mona's voice was soft, but it carried an undeniable strength. "Damian, you're still holding on to something. Something that's keeping you stuck in this place. You think it's easier to stay angry, to give up, because that way you don't have to feel the real pain. But the anger is only hiding what you're afraid of." Damian's anger didn't subside, but it shifted. "What am I afraid of?" he asked bitterly. "Of losing everything," Mona replied, her voice unwavering. "Of letting go of the man you used to be. Of accepting that you can't control everything, that you can't fix yourself with money or power." The truth in her words hit him like a wave, and for the first time, Damian felt something inside him crack open. He didn't want to admit it, but the fear was there. Fear of never being who he had been. Fear of facing the parts of himself he had always kept hidden. "You're afraid to face the part of you that feels broken," Mona continued, her gaze steady. "But that's the part that needs healing the most. Not your legs, not your body. Your heart. You need to let yourself feel. Let yourself break. Only then can you rebuild." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was different from before. It wasn't the silence of anger or frustration. It was the silence of something beginning to shift. Damian was still angry, still bitter, but there was a new understanding creeping in, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, Mona was right. He hadn't wanted to face his own weakness, hadn't wanted to admit that his pride had been holding him back. But now, sitting in that small room with Mona's unwavering patience surrounding him, he began to see how much he had been denying himself. He had spent so long trying to fix everything, trying to control the world around him, that he had ignored the one thing that could truly help him: acceptance. Damian exhaled slowly, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. He wasn't ready to fully surrender to Mona's methods, but for the first time, he was willing to try. To let go of his anger, if only for a moment.
"I don't know if I can do this," he admitted quietly, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. "But I'm willing to try."
Mona smiled, a gentle expression of encouragement. "That's all I'm asking for, Damian. One step at a time." And for the first time in weeks, Damian felt a flicker of something within him, a sense of hope. It wasn't much,
but it was enough to begin. Damian Holden's world had always been built on appearances. He was a man who controlled the narrative of his life, shaping every aspect of it with precision. But here, in the quiet of Mona's small therapy room, the facade he had spent his entire life perfecting was slowly crumbling. It was during that quiet moment, as Mona sat across from him, waiting patiently for him to speak, that Damian felt the weight of everything he had been hiding. The anger, the frustration, the constant battle against vulnerability, it all came crashing down on him like a tidal wave. "You're still running," Mona's words echoed in his mind, a persistent reminder that he had been hiding from the one thing that could heal him, the pain, the fear. Damian felt his heart tighten in his chest. He had been hiding for so long, but now, with Mona's calm presence urging him to confront the truth, he couldn't avoid it any longer. "I've spent my whole life running," he whispered, the admission slipping out before he could stop it. "Running from everything. My family, my mistakes, my own fear." Mona's gaze softened, but she didn't interrupt. She simply let him speak. "I used to think that power, that control would make everything better, but it never did. It only made me more isolated." His voice broke, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel the sting of the loneliness he had carried for so long. "I pushed people away. My father, my brother, my ex-wife. I thought if I kept moving, if I kept pushing forward, I could outrun the pain. But now I realized that the pain was never about them. It was about me." Damian paused, his hands shaking as the weight of his words settled in. The anger, the resentment, the endless drive for success. It had all been a mask. A way to keep himself from confronting the true source of his paralysis. Fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of being seen for who he really was. Mona's voice broke the silence. "You're not the only one who's been hiding, Damian. But the first step toward healing is facing what we've been running from." That night, as Damian lay in bed, the images of his past flooded his mind. His strained relationships with his family. The moments he had spent alone, pushing through the pain, telling himself that success and power would fill the emptiness. But they hadn't. The emptiness had only grown. And now, sitting in Mona's quiet office, he realized that healing wasn't just about walking again. It was about letting go of the fear that had controlled every aspect of his life. The fear of vulnerability. The fear of not being enough. The next session with Mona was different. Damian came in with a renewed sense of resolve, his mind still processing everything he had confronted the night before. He was ready to try, ready to face what had been buried deep within him for so long. Mona greeted him with the same calm demeanor as always, but today there was a shift in Damian. He wasn't as defensive, wasn't as resistant to the process. He was willing to face the emotions that had once felt too dangerous to approach. "Let's start with something simple today," Mona suggested, her voice steady. "I want you to focus on your breath. Not your legs, not the wheelchair, just your breath. In and out." Damian did as she asked, focusing on the rhythm of his breathing, the sensation of air filling his lungs. For the first time, he allowed himself to be fully present, not rushing to escape the moment, not pushing to move on. Mona continued, guiding him through the process of mindfulness, teaching him that healing was as much about the mind as it was about the body. "Your body responds to what your mind believes, Damian," she explained. "But you've been so focused on what you've lost that you haven't given yourself the chance to heal. Let go of the anger. Let go of the fear." He took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. And for the first time, he felt something stir within him. A small flicker of hope. Not for the man he once was, but for the man he could still become. The physical progress was slow.
far slower than Damian wanted, but it was progress nonetheless. Over the next few weeks, Damian began to engage more in the exercises Mona taught him. They started with small movements, simple stretches, but each one was a challenge. His muscles were stiff, uncooperative. His body, once strong and reliable, felt foreign to him. But Mona was patient, guiding him with unwavering belief. She never once pushed him too hard, never demanded more than he could give. And slowly, very slowly, the tension in his body began to ease. The stiffness that had gripped his legs seemed to soften, if only for a moment. He made small movements, shaky at first, but they were his movements. For the first time since the accident, he felt a small sense of control. But it wasn't just his physical recovery that began to shift. Mona's presence in his life had become something more than just therapy. She was teaching him something deeper, something he hadn't realized he needed. She wasn't just a healer. She was a reminder that there was still good in the world, that humility and compassion were strengths, not weaknesses. One day, after a particularly exhausting session, Mona sat down beside him, offering him water and a moment of rest. As they sat in silence, he found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone else. "You've been through a lot," Damian said quietly, his voice soft. "But you're still here, still helping people. How do you do it? How do you stay so calm?" Mona smiled faintly, a touch of sadness in her eyes. "Because I've learned that helping others helps me. I'm not just working to heal you, Damian. I'm working to heal myself, too." She paused, her gaze drifting for a moment before she looked back at him. "I've spent years putting myself through school while working here. I want to be a therapist, to help people who've been through what I've been through. I want to make a difference. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Damian absorbed her words, his heart heavy with a mix of admiration and guilt. Mona had sacrificed so much to help others, and yet here he was, still struggling to let go of his pride. Her humility, her dedication, began to inspire him. He had spent so long focusing on his own success, his own empire, but Mona had shown him that true strength lay in the ability to give, to help others without expecting anything in return. As the days passed, Damian found himself opening up more, not just to Mona, but to the possibility of healing. Healing wasn't just about the body. It was about the heart, the mind, and the soul. And for the first time, Damian felt like he was beginning to understand what that really meant. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be setbacks, more moments of frustration and doubt. But as he looked at Mona, sitting across from him with quiet strength and patience, he knew that he had found someone worth trusting. Someone who wasn't going to give up on him, no matter how hard the journey became. And for the first time, Damian believed that maybe, just maybe, he could walk again. Not just with his legs, but with his heart. The air in the therapy room felt different that day. It was thicker, laden with anticipation. Damian could feel it, a quiet tension that had been building for weeks. Mona had been asking him to trust the process, to focus not on the end goal, but on the small victories that came with each step. Today, the room seemed to hum with the possibility of something monumental. Damian had been through the motions of physical therapy countless times. His body still felt foreign to him, each movement awkward and labored. The progress, though steady, had been slow, too slow for his impatient nature. Yet today, something was different. Today he could feel the shift, not just in his body but in his mind. Mona stood beside him, her hand gently on his arm, her voice calm and encouraging. Just take one step, Damian. One step at a time. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the pounding of his heart in his chest. The room seemed to close in around him as he positioned himself on the edge of the mat. His legs trembled, still weak from months of disuse, but the determination in his chest pushed him forward. The process hadn't been easy. Nothing about this journey had been. But he knew this was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With Mona's steady guidance, Damian shifted his weight and slowly, agonizingly, placed one foot in front of the other. The first step was shaky, uncertain. His body protested, every muscle stiff and unwilling, but for the first time, he didn't let that stop him. He steadied himself, took another breath, and pushed through the discomfort. The second step came more easily. It was still far from graceful, but it was progress. Slow, unsteady progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Mona was silent beside him, her presence steady and unshakable. She had always told him that healing wasn't about perfection, it was about the journey, the willingness to keep going even when the road was rough. And here he was, taking his first steps, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Damian paused, his body trembling from the effort, but he didn't stop. The weight of what he had just accomplished began to sink in. It wasn't about walking perfectly. It wasn't even about walking at all. It was about taking that step forward.
About trusting the process and allowing himself to move forward, even when he didn't have all the answers. He looked up at Mona, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief.
I did it, he whispered, the words feeling strange on his tongue. I actually did it. Mona smiled, her eyes filled with quiet pride. You did. But it wasn't just your legs that moved today, Damian. It was your heart, your willingness to trust the journey. As the days went on, the steps came a little easier, though they were still shaky, uncoordinated. But the progress was undeniable. Every time Damian took another step, he felt more in control of his body. And with each step, he began to realize something even more important. Healing wasn't just about the physical. It was about the mental and emotional work he had been avoiding for so long. It was the work that Mona had helped him begin, the work of letting go of his pride, of allowing himself to be vulnerable, of facing the parts of himself he had buried deep beneath layers of control and anger. As the session drew to a close, Damian sat on the mat, catching his breath, his muscles sore but strangely invigorated. Mona sat beside him, offering him a bottle of water. They were both silent for a moment, but the silence was different now. It was no longer filled with tension or frustration. It was filled with understanding, with the recognition of how far he had come. Finally, Damian broke the silence. I owe you an apology, Mona. Mona turned to him, surprised but not shocked. She had always known that this moment would come, the moment when Damian would see not just the physical progress he had made, but the emotional and mental journey he had embarked on. I've been arrogant, Damian continued, his voice quiet but sincere. I've doubted you, dismissed you. I thought I knew everything, that my money and power could fix everything. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Mona didn't interrupt. She simply listened, her eyes soft with understanding. I've spent my life controlling everything around me, thinking that if I could just get everything perfect, I'd be happy. But I wasn't. I was empty. I was broken. And you were the one who helped me see that, Damian said, his voice trembling slightly. I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you gratitude for helping me see that healing starts here, He tapped his chest. Not with money, not with power, but with letting go of the things that hold us back. Mona's smile was soft, humble. Damian, I didn't do anything you weren't already capable of. I just helped you see it. Damian didn't know how to respond to that. He had spent so much time thinking of Mona as someone who was beneath him, someone who couldn't possibly understand his world. But in that moment, he realized that Mona had taught him more about strength, humility, and vulnerability than anyone ever had. It wasn't just your legs that needed healing, Mona added quietly. It was your heart. And that's where it all begins. Damian nodded, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He realized that his healing wasn't just about walking again. It was about learning to live again, learning to trust again. Mona's patience, her unwavering belief in him, had opened a door he hadn't known existed. He had walked through it, one shaky step at a time, and for the first time in months, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He looked at her, his voice sincere. Thank you, Mona, for everything. Mona didn't ask for thanks. She didn't need them. But when she smiled at him, it was with a quiet, knowing pride. It was never about the apology, Damian, she said softly. It was about you learning to see yourself as capable of healing. And you've already taken the first step. Damian smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. He was still far from where he wanted to be, but for the first time, he was moving forward. And that was enough.
Mona Jacobs had never asked for attention, but it was hard to ignore her now. After weeks of working with Damian, she had become more than just a janitor. She had become a catalyst for change. Her story, the quiet resilience she demonstrated over the years, was something people couldn't stop talking about. She wasn't just helping Damian walk again. She was helping him live again. And in doing so, she was inspiring others to do the same. It began slowly. A few well-placed articles in local newspapers, a couple of online posts about her role in Damian's recovery. But soon, Mona found herself invited to events, asked to speak about the power of vulnerability and the mind-body connection in healing. She had always shied away from the spotlight, but this was different. This was bigger than her. This was about the work she believed in, the work that had helped her mother recover. And now, it was helping Damian. Damian watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest as Mona spoke at one of their first charity events together. She stood tall at the podium, a figure of quiet strength, speaking passionately about the importance of mental health and recovery. He couldn't help but think about how far she had come. The janitor he had once dismissed as insignificant was now a beacon of hope for so many. Mona's voice rang out, steady and filled with purpose. Healing doesn't come from isolation, she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. It comes from connection, embracing the vulnerability that we all try so hard to hide. It comes from realizing that we're not meant to walk this road alone. The room was silent, captivated by her words. And for the first time in his life, Damian felt truly proud of someone other than himself. As the applause began, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see one of the event organizers, a woman he barely knew, smiling at him. "You've done something incredible here," she said, her voice warm. "Mona's story is changing lives."
"And yours too, I imagine." Damian nodded, his throat tight. "She's changed everything," he said softly, his voice filled with more gratitude than he had ever expressed. Back in the therapy room, things had shifted between them. No longer just patient and healer, Damian and Mona were partners in something greater than either of them had anticipated. The charity projects they had started to work on together brought them closer, their bond now solidified by shared purpose. Damian continued his physical therapy, but now there was a new sense of direction behind his efforts. It wasn't just about walking anymore. It was about helping others walk through their own struggles. The realization had come to him quietly, like a shift in the wind. As he pushed through his exercises, feeling the strength returning to his body, he began to see the parallels between his healing and the healing he now sought to inspire in others. For so long, Damian had believed that strength was something you had to achieve alone. He had built an empire by working tirelessly, pushing through every obstacle, never showing weakness. But now, as he watched Mona work, helping people, reaching out, guiding them through their own fears, he understood that true strength was not about standing alone. It was about standing together. "Let me show you something," Mona said one morning after a particularly grueling session. She had been quiet for a while, watching him struggle through the exercises. When she saw the frustration begin to build in his face, she decided it was time. Damian paused, wiping sweat from his brow, looking up at her. "What is it?" "Sometimes the hardest part of healing is the first step," Mona replied. "But it's not just the physical steps we take. It's the steps we take toward others." She gestured to the small group of people gathered in the corner of the room, all of them watching with a mixture of awe and curiosity. It was a small group, mostly people who had been with him through his therapy journey, the ones who had been watching him, learning from him as he had from Mona. He had begun to talk to them about his struggles, about his doubts, and now he realized it was time to let them see his progress. "You've been healing in your own way, Damian," Mona said, her voice steady but gentle. "But it's time to help them heal too. You don't have to walk this road by yourself. They're all here to walk with you." Damian looked around at the group, at the faces filled with hope, and for the first time, he saw them not as strangers, but as people he could help. People who needed him as much as he had once needed Mona. A shift began in him. Slowly, tentatively, he stood up from his wheelchair, feeling the weight of his own body for the first time. The room fell silent as he took one slow step forward, then another. His legs felt weak, but there was something different now. He wasn't just moving for himself. He was moving for them. He could hear the collective breath of the room as he took his third step, then his fourth, shaky but determined. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't graceful. But it was real. He was real. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that his healing was not just about his own recovery. It was about helping others find their strength too. Mona watched from the side, her face calm, but her eyes filled with pride. Damian had come a long way. From the man who had once thought he had to do it all on his own, to the man who was now ready to lead others, to help them heal as he had. "Take it one step at a time," she whispered to him, though he couldn't hear her over the roar of the room's applause. It wasn't just applause for his physical recovery. It was for his transformation into someone who had learned to embrace vulnerability. Someone who had learned that healing wasn't just about what you could do alone. It was about what you could do together. As they stood together, looking out over the new initiative they had created, Damian felt something he hadn't in a long time. A sense of peace. He had been afraid of healing, afraid of letting go of the control that had defined him for so long. But now, he realized that true strength lay not in control, but in connection. And Mona had taught him that. Through her quiet wisdom, her compassion, and her own journey of healing, she had shown him a new way of living, of being. Together, they were creating something that went beyond themselves, a legacy of healing, of hope, and of the strength that comes from embracing the journey, no matter how difficult it may be. The road ahead wasn't easy, but with Mona by his side and a new purpose in his heart, Damian knew he was ready for whatever came next. Damian Holden had always been a man of action. Every decision, every movement in his life had been calculated, deliberate. His success in the business world had been built on a foundation of control and power, carefully crafted through years of tireless effort. But now, as he stood in the middle of a quiet room, the weight of the past and the promise of the future pressing on his shoulders, he realized that the true strength he had been searching for was not in control. It was in surrender. The first time he stood unaided, his legs wobbled, and the world around him seemed to tilt. It was nothing spectacular. No cheering crowds, no cameras flashing. He wasn't doing it for anyone else's approval. This time, it was for himself. Damian took a breath, grounding himself, and took a slow step forward. He felt the muscles in his legs protest, the discomfort sharp, but something inside him pushed him onward. His mind, for so long tangled in fear and pride, was now clear. With every step, he realized that healing wasn't about reaching perfection. It wasn't about doing things perfectly or impressing anyone. It was about being honest with himself and taking the steps, no matter how shaky,
towards something greater.
His gaze shifted to Mona, standing in the corner of the room, her presence as calm and steady as always. She had been with him every step of the way, through his pain, his resistance, his anger, and now, through this quiet victory. Their journey had been anything but conventional. But in that moment, Damian understood something Mona had been teaching him from the start. It wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the journey. With every step forward, Damian felt the weight of years of emotional armor begin to loosen. The man who had once defined himself by his empire, by his ability to control everything, was slowly transforming into someone new. Someone who could embrace vulnerability. Someone who could admit he didn't have all the answers. And someone who could ask for help. He had spent so long hiding from his fears, his pain, but now he was finally ready to face it all. Mona had given him more than the ability to walk again. She had given him the strength to face what he had been avoiding for so long, his own humanity. As the days turned into weeks, Damian continued his physical therapy, but there was no longer the same urgency in his movements. The need for speed, for perfection, had faded. Now, he approached each session with a new perspective. It wasn't about how fast he could walk or how many steps he could take. It was about the process. It was about learning to move without fear, without the constant pressure to be something he wasn't. The bond between Damian and Mona had shifted as well. They were no longer just patient and healer. They had become equals, partners in a journey that neither of them had expected to take. Their relationship had blossomed into something deeper than Damian could have imagined. It wasn't just the physical therapy sessions that connected them now. It was the shared vulnerability, the openness, the quiet understanding that passed between them without words. Mona's patience, her wisdom, had taught him something he had never learned in boardrooms or business deals. The importance of connection, of being seen and understood, of sharing both the triumphs and the struggles. One evening, as they wrapped up another session, Damian found himself sitting across from Mona, his body sore but his spirit lighter than it had been in a long time. The journey wasn't over, but it had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "You know, I never thought I'd be here," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I never thought I'd be this man, the one who needs help, who needs to heal. I thought I had it all figured out." Mona smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're not the first person to feel that way, Damian. We all think we can do it alone, that strength is about standing on our own. But the truth is, strength is in knowing when to ask for help." Damian nodded, his heart swelling with appreciation for the woman who had not only helped him walk again, but had also helped him see life in a completely new light. He had spent so many years thinking strength was about dominance and control, but now he understood that true strength was in the ability to be vulnerable, to admit when you didn't have all the answers, and to lean on others when you needed it. As their work together continued, Damian and Mona became more involved in charitable initiatives that focused on bridging the gap between physical recovery and mental health. Damian, once a man driven by profit and power, now found himself dedicated to creating change in a way he never imagined. He was no longer focused on building his empire. He was focused on building something that mattered, something that could truly help people. He and Mona worked side by side on projects that brought mental health to the forefront of physical recovery. They spoke at conferences, worked with therapists and doctors, and began to make a real impact on the lives of those who had suffered in silence, just as Damian had. It wasn't easy. The road to recovery, both physical and emotional, was never linear. But for the first time, Damian understood that he wasn't in this alone, and that made all the difference. The day came when Damian stood before a room full of people at one of their charity events. His body was still a work in progress, but he was standing tall, no longer weighed down by the pride that had once held him captive. As he looked out at the crowd, his thoughts drifted to Mona, standing quietly by his side. "She's the reason I'm here today," Damian began, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "Not just because she helped me walk again, but because she helped me see what real strength is. Strength isn't about control. It's about embracing your humanity, your flaws, and your ability to heal." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And it's about helping others do the same. We're all on this journey together, and together, we can heal." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Damian didn't hear it. His focus was on Mona, who smiled at him from the sidelines, her eyes filled with quiet pride. She had given him the greatest gift, an understanding of what it truly meant to heal. And for the first time, Damian understood that his healing wasn't just for him. It was for everyone. He had learned that the true meaning of healing wasn't in the perfection of the body. It was in the growth of the soul. And as he looked at Mona, he knew that their journey was far from over. Together, they were walking into the future, side by side.